thank you guys very much for coming. We're happy to have Brett here as our second guest of Entrepreneurship Live this semester, broadcast by the TexTalks podcast. Brett is a staple in the entrepreneurship scene in Austin, and I don't want to recount his incredibly long LinkedIn profile, so you guys can look that up on your own. But he's a very accomplished entrepreneur and investor. You should check out his blog, which has a lot of cool information on it, lucky7.io. Please welcome Brett Hurt.
Thank you.
I'm sure most people are here because of Bizarre Voice and Data.World, but I want to start a little bit earlier than that. Can you tell us about your days as a programmer and creating an online game, and how did that impact you, what you did later in life?
Sure. So first of all, it's a real pleasure to be here. Last time I was here, I was actually in the interviewer chair because I was entrepreneur in residence at UT and had a lot of fun with that speaker series. So it's great to be back. Always love being back at UT. So I'm actually an Austin native, and I started programming when I was 7 years old, which was in 1979. I'm 44 now. And I was very lucky, and my blog is actually named as a tribute to my mom, Lucky7. I was very lucky to find my passion at an early age, and I found that because I had a real superhuman mom who was dedicated on her children finding whatever their true passion is, and whatever that would be in a non-judgmental way. And the superhuman aspect of that really got tested that when I started programming at 7, I didn't stop. I programmed over 40 hours a week from age 7 to 21. So if you think about that as a childhood, it means I wasn't outside playing much. It means that I wasn't being run around to a bunch of different lessons like our kids are being. And it means that a lot of people thought there was something wrong with me. And a lot of people tried to influence my mom to say there's something wrong with your son. As a matter of fact, my third grade teacher, I didn't know this at the time, pulled my mom aside. She only told me this after I became successful, and said, I think there's something seriously wrong with your son. All he talks about is computers, and he's going to be hopelessly lost in life. That's all he knows how to do. And I even got a little bit of crap from my dad, who would say, son, you don't know how to take out the trash, you don't know how to mow the lawn. And I would say, Dad, if you just leave me alone, I'll be able to pay people to do all those things. And later on in life, we'd laugh about that because he was like, I'm so glad you didn't listen to me. And to this day, I still don't know how to mow a lawn. I do take out the trash occasionally. I've been married 20 years, key to marriage. But I really feel very lucky to have fallen in love at such an early age. And there's some adults that still haven't found what they're truly passionate about. And to fall in love that early on is a real gift. Our son's first grade teacher is a woman who worked for Arthur Andersen, who, after having a very successful undergrad and launching a very successful career, decided to quit 10 years ago and become a first grade teacher because that's what she always wanted to do. And her mom was like, don't do it, you're going to make half the money you made and everything else. And I really admire that a lot because she followed her passion. But it took her until she was an adult to find that. I found that at an early age. So my first programs, to answer your question, were my very first program that got any notoriety in Austin was a bulletin board system, which I launched when I was 10. And by the time I was 14, that became one of the most popular BBSs in Austin. And I had no idea what people were talking about. They were talking about politics. And if you don't know what a BBS is two computers connecting via a modem. So it's pre-internet, and we had chat rooms, we had discussion boards, you had the ability to download all types of programs, all types of games. We had ratios of number of downloads to number of uploads, and you had to contribute back by uploading some programs to get additional download credit so you wouldn't become a leech, as the term that we used back in the BBS days. And that, I did multiple iterations of bulletin board systems. And then when I was here at UT, when I was 18, I launched one of the first internet games. And to me, that seemed like an extension of the world I already knew, the BBS world, where I'd created multiple games on my BBS. But the amazing power of being able to have a game where anybody from around the world could play it for free. And pretty soon we had people playing it from Russia, from Singapore, from Germany. It was really wild. True story about this. When I was 18, I actually met my wife here at UT, and we met at a gym. I had started working out pretty obsessived when I was 14 because I wanted to start dating, and I needed something to transform my physical appearance at least. And I was the same person on the inside, but anyways, I met her, and we were having this great conversation at the gym. It was like this amazing conversation. I'm a freshman at UT, and I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing. I'm talking with the most beautiful woman I've ever talked with in my life. I love college. And she looks at me, and she's like, let me ask you, what fraternity are you going to be in? And I said, well, I'm creating this game on the internet, and I'm spending around 40 hours a week programming that, and it's really cool, and here's what it's all about. It was based on D&D. It's kind of this amazing age that we live in. And I had to explain, what the internet was, and she said, well, it was great talking with you. So I've been fighting this uphill battle for a while, but fortunately we live in an age now where the nerds truly have inherited the earth. Revenge of the Nerds actually became true. And it's just it's mind-boggling to me, like how much now it's affecting everything.
So your BBS and the game you created, you were doing that just for fun?
Totally for fun, totally labor of love. I never made any money on those. I had no commercial interest, actually, even at that point in time. I became commercially oriented when my parents were like, hey, you're going to need to make some money with this skill set. We're not going to support you forever. And then
what did you do? What was your?
I became very commercial at that point.
What was your first commercial interest?
Well, I didn't want to go to college, to be honest with you. I just wanted to program. But my mom forced me to go to UT. And she forced me because everybody in the family had been through UT. And I had a very good experience at UT. I've got no complaints. I'm glad I went. But I just didn't feel ready. Like with that childhood, there's pros of that childhood, there's cons of that childhood. The con was I wanted to be an entrepreneur when I was here in undergrad. And if I was starting out today, when I was entrepreneur in residence here, the thing that amazed me about UT is that there are so many entrepreneurial clubs now. There's such an amazing amount of resources to you guys that just didn't exist back then. People weren't starting businesses while they're in school. Michael Dell was, but that was very, very unusual, very unusual. Almost nobody was doing that, and certainly nobody that I knew. And so I kind of settled on just not feeling like I was ready yet and needing some business experience first. And I decided to go work at Deloitte & Touche Consulting Group. And I was bit a little bit by the commercial bug too already, because when I was in undergrad, for my entire junior and senior year, I worked for Andersen Consulting, which is now called Accenture, full-time, even though I was in school. So you can say I was very...
And you were programming 40 hours a week?
And I was programming, yeah. I mean, you can make up a lot of time on the weekends. Weekends where I'd just spend almost the entire weekend in this massive coding frenzy. The game became very demanding. I mean, the game took off. Like in 1992, supposedly it was the most popular game on the internet at that time. And there were conferences around the game. I'd get flown out to speak at conferences with players of the game. People would pay for me to come out there, but I didn't make any money directly off the game. And so about a year into consulting, graduating from UT, I realized that I had done something that I felt like I needed to do, but that I'd made a mistake. That my heart was always with, figuring out a way to turn my passion into a business directly and become an entrepreneur. And so I was looking for any way out of Deloitte that was possible. And one of my friends there went to go get his MBA, and they paid for it. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Nobody in my family had gotten an MBA, so I didn't exactly understand what that meant. But I asked him about it, and he pumped me up about it. And I thought, that could be a really good platform in which to start a business. And so I was actually the first systems analyst, that was my title at the time at Deloitte, that convinced Deloitte to fund paying for my MBA. Once I did that, the floodgates were open, and there were a lot of other systems analysts that followed. And the argument I made to them is like, look, you pay for it for a business analyst. The world is becoming more and more technical. And the reason you pay for it for a business analyst is because you expect that after they get their MBA, they're going to come back and work for you, and then they can sell work to the people that also got an MBA that go work for these Fortune 500 companies. I was like, well, if you don't think that's going to happen on the technical side, like, of course that's going to happen on the technical side. So they bought that, and I convinced them to pay, and I was fortunate enough to get into Wharton. They would only pay if you got into one of the top 10 schools at the time, and then I never went back. I wrote all of my essays for grad school about starting a business, and I was absolutely hell-bent on doing it. And so the first business that I started for profit was my own consulting business, because I felt like if they can bill me out at $250 to $350 an hour and pay me $25 an hour, just maybe I'm able to sell that work on my own. And I did. So my first business was called Hurt Technology Consulting. I made $250 to $350 an hour, and I felt completely liberated. And that's actually I felt completely free after that, because I thought, well, I never have to go work for anybody again. I could at least be a consultant on my own. And what I did in that business was I built a lot of early websites and web applications, things that were pretty unique at that time in 1997. And so I turned my skill into something where I directly got the financial benefit versus, having a 10-to-1 type of leverage ratio. I did hire very quickly. I hired Wharton undergrads to do a lot of work too. And Wharton, at that time, and it still has this program, has an M&T program. It's called Management of Technology. And it's a dual degree. And the smartest Wharton undergrads get into that program. It's very, very hard to get into that program. It's very hard to get into Wharton for undergrad. It's very hard to get into M&T. That's like, these are people that got 1590s, 1600s on their SAT. I know they changed the SAT score, but they got like nearly a perfect score. And they just were brilliant. And I would pay them $25 to $35 an hour and bill them out at $75 to $80 an hour. So it was much more fair.
So
and they were super happy. I mean, they made really good money while they were still in school.
Fast forward now to you take Bazaar Voice public. I don't want to spend too much time on Bazaar Voice. I know you've talked about it a lot, I'm sure. I'm very curious to know about the transition from it's a fledgling company into winning big contracts. Was there one contract that was something where you said, okay, now we're really rolling and we're something big? Or how did that happen?
Yeah, for sure. There's always that moment in a business. Like, with my current company, Data.World, we just last week announced a partnership with the White House. That's a big moment for us. With Bazaar Voice, that moment was when we won Walmart. And I'll never forget that moment because we had a competitor named Power Reviews. We still have that competitor. But at the time, it was unclear who was going to win. And Walmart was one of those wins that would set the tone, because at the time, Walmart was the #1 retailer in the world, and they still are. And Amazon at the time was only 5% of US online retail sales, and Amazon today is around 25% of US online retail sales. So things have changed a lot in 11 years. But at that time, Walmart was seen as, if you could win Walmart, if Walmart validated your business, then from that point on, you could just point and say, well, it was good enough for Walmart.
Why did they validate you as opposed to Power Reviews?
Well, not only did they validate us, but back then, Power Reviews was giving their solution away for free. And Walmart started out paying us $500,000 a year. So they had a free alternative and a $500,000 a year alternative, and they chose us. And they chose us because they wanted a company that was going to manage this very, very deliberately for them. And by this, I mean customer reviews. It was the first time in Walmart's history when they launched customer reviews. When we started Bazaar Voice, there were only 3 retailers in the entire United States who had customer reviews. And Walmart was not one of them. And so it was a big, Amazon's had customer reviews for a long, long time, since 1996 to be exact. They were the pioneer by far in customer reviews. And so they were nervous about it. They wanted someone to manage it very carefully. They wanted to make sure that no content went up there that had something derogatory about any of their employees, or something that would attack them in terms of some kind of thing unrelated to the product. And they were fine if it was a 1-star review or 2-star review. And in fact, we would not sign a client at Bazaar Voice unless they would be authentic about customer reviews. That would have been a PR disaster for us and the client. But they wanted it managed very strategically, and the fact that the alternative was a $0 price point with almost no services wrapped around it, et cetera, really hurt Walmart. But at that time, I mean, a lot of people, there's some people in this audience from Bazaar Voice. At that time, the blogs, like the people in Silicon Valley, were basically laughing at Bazaar Voice. They were saying, this is the Web 2.0 age. Do you guys remember that term, Web 2.0? This is the Web 2.0 age. Power Reviews is going to easily beat Bazaar Voice because they're a free solution, and these guys are jokers trying to be kind of an enterprise, software as a service solution. And that's the way of the dinosaur, and this is the new model. And it just didn't work. Power Reviews ended up pivoting about 2 years later to a paid model. But when they pivoted, we had already won, over 100 retailers, over 100 of the largest retailers by that time.
When you won Walmart, after that, could you say the rest is history?
I wish I could say it's that easy. It's not exactly that easy, but it was a seismic moment when you win Walmart in a B2B software as a service company that's focused on retail. It's a game-changing move. When you make Walmart super happy as well, then it's really a game-changing move. I mean, if we had blown up, it would have been a nightmare, right? I mean, then we would have been done, potentially just out of business at that point. I remember I got a call from Walmart's head of PR about 2 weeks before they signed with us. And I was in an offsite with my team. And she said, I want you to understand that we're the most talked about person, place, or thing outside of the President of the United States. That's what we have to track in the media in terms of media mentions. And she said, if you mess up one time, if you just make one mistake, you're fired. So that was intimidating. I went back into the team meeting and I said, hey, here's what was shared with me. And with Walmart, let's make sure that we read every review that comes in on Walmart's site at least 3 times, which was kind of absurd. But we did, and we didn't mess up one time. And that then set the tone.
Let's talk about a seismic shift. I assume to be a seismic shift in your life when you switched from being an entrepreneur to an investor. Mm-hmm. Why did you do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, being an entrepreneur is something where you have to have a tremendous amount of energy for it. There's a lot of romance at the beginning of entrepreneurship where you can really fall in love with the idea, you can fall in love with your co-founders. That romance is always there to some extent. Like if you truly fell in love with the mission, then you'll always be in love with the mission. The founder will always love the business, I think, the most because they were there since the beginning. They breathed that mission into life. But the brutal reality about entrepreneurship is it's very, very hard. And persistence will carry you through some of the really tough times. Like when you have to part ways, and I never had to do this at Bazaar Voice, my co-founder was amazing, but when you have to part ways with a co-founder, that is brutal. I can't describe how devastatingly hard that is. And it happens all the time. And so I just felt like after Bazaar Voice that I had made enough money and I had run so hard for so long, like when I started Coremetrics, or when I left Coremetrics to start Bazaar Voice, I left on a Friday and I started Bazaar Voice on a Monday. And I felt like I needed to give myself some time to scratch some other itches in life. And the best itch I could scratch was helping others and hoping that would create a multiplier effect, that the more people I helped as an investor and a mentor, the more they would go out and create jobs. And like one company can only create so many jobs. Bazaar Voice created over 800 jobs. And lots of economic impacts. Like one of my favorite stats about Bazaar Voice is there are now about 30 companies in Austin who were founded by Bazaar Voice alums after our IPO, which is amazing. So I thought that as an investor there would be this multiplier effect, and to some extent that was true. But the reason I hopped back into Data.World and doing it again, starting my 6th business, is that there were 2 things that happened. One was our daughter is really extraordinary. Everybody brags about their children. I'll brag about her, but she is truly extraordinary. And I would involve her, like, when I was entrepreneur residence here, when I would go startup, or when I judged a startup competition, when I had a pitch meeting where it was a CPG type product that I thought she would relate to, I included her. And my parents always did that with me. My parents were always entrepreneurs, and I grew up working at their stores and got a business since that way. And so I thought, that's setting a good example as a parent, that she maybe gets a lot of passion and energy from these other entrepreneurs, and that happened. She did, but she started to ask me, "Hey, Dad, when are you going to start another business?" I was like, Rachel, you see all the things I'm doing? She's like, yeah, that's great. When are you going to start another business? And it hit me really hard because I started Bazaar Voice when she was 6 months old. And Abraham Lincoln has this great quote, which says, if you want your children to walk in a certain direction, you yourself must walk in that direction. And that was actually the best part of her childhood, was coming to the Bazaar Voice client summits, coming to a Bazaar Voice all hands, like seeing something like that come to life, which was really magical. I mean, there was a point in Bazaar Voice's history where we had won the #1 place to work when we're a small company, #1 place to work when we're a medium-sized company, the #1 when we're a large company. And she got to see that culture. She got to see how vibrant it was and alive. I mean, you just felt totally alive in the office. And so, even though I was being super dad, I went to like every field trip. I, take the kids and my wife. We'd all go to another country, for a month, to go live there and really immerse ourselves in it. And all these things you kind of dream about. It wasn't, the whole goal of life is to have a life of purpose. And it wasn't fulfilling that enough for my own child, who I cared, a lot about influencing. And our son hadn't gotten to see that at all. He had only seen the aftermath. And so that was a big factor. The other big factor was I got involved with the Aspen Institute with the Henry Crown Fellowship. And this is a program that's been very transformational for people who have gone through it. Reid Hoffman went through it. Reed Hastings went through it. Anil Bushri, who's the co-founder and CEO of Workday, went through it. It's amazing, like all these people in government and, health industry, just amazing, people have gone through that. And that program was another awakening, where it really gets you to think a lot about what your utility is in this world. And Henry Crown was a self-made billionaire, immigrant success story, first generation, in Chicago. And he would constantly encourage people in Chicago after he became successful. He would say, you see all the problems out there? You see the polluted river? You see this? You see that? All those problems require one thing. Requires people to step up and solve those problems. And the people that may be able to solve them the best are people that have already proven that they can be successful at solving something else. And so when he passed away, they endowed this program, the Crown Trust. And it's an amazing experience. I mean, it's unbelievable, the friends that I've made through that program and how it's transformed us. There's people like Bree Pettis, who's in my year, who is the co-founder of and the CEO of MakerBot. There's just, I could go on and on talking about the people in that program, but it really got me thinking about, do I really at this age want to spend the rest of my life this way? Or is my real utility in this world being an entrepreneur and creating impact through entrepreneurship? The nice thing about the investing thing is I still do it and I can always go back to it full time. But we're on a real serious, really exciting mission here with Data.World. It's the biggest mission I've ever gone after. It has the most potential to change the world for the better. And so yeah, that gets you out of bed in the morning.
We'll get to Data.World in just a second. One thing I wanted to ask you about is this conventional wisdom of people cautioning you against working with your family. But you work very closely with your family.
Right.
What were your thoughts on that conventional wisdom? Did you ever have any hesitation?
Well, so I've worked very closely with my wife in two contexts. One worked and one didn't work. The one that worked is us investing together. She has phenomenal business acumen. Her parents were entrepreneurs from the time she was born. She's a much better read on character than I am. if she agrees that a business idea is a good idea, then we're probably going to we're going to have a much more likely chance of being right. And I went recently to a VC dinner where half the CEOs in the room that were there, and this is a Silicon Valley, very prominent Silicon Valley VC, who is making a real push in Austin, in the post-Austin Ventures void. They're making a real big push. And there's a lot of other small VCs too that are merging here as well to fill that void. And half the CEOs were companies that we backed at the very beginning, which felt really good. We've got a very good performing portfolio. So that context worked. The context that didn't work is she actually started Core Metrics with me. And we were 26 when we started that company, and we worked, almost every night, including weekends, till around 11 p.m. And I wouldn't recommend doing that, but that we were young and dumb, and you've got to work dumb before you learn how to work smart. And anybody that's been in business for a while or has worked for a while knows what I mean. That you've got to put in your hours to figure out how to work smart. It's the only way to do it. And because experience is the best teacher. And so that didn't work well because all we talked about outside of Core Metrics was Core Metrics. And especially didn't work well because she wasn't an executive in the company. And people assumed when you got to around 100 people that she was there because she was my wife, which was completely unfair because she had won design awards on our behalf. Our user interface for our first application won this award. Our trade show booth won this award. Our website won. All that stuff Deborah did. And I felt like I was fighting that a bit internally, that it got political in my own company. And we talked about it, and we were just like, look, on multiple levels, this is just not a good idea. And then she took off the next year in San Francisco. We lived in San Francisco at the time and rollerbladed for about a year in the marina. So she had a really, really good pause. But I can understand what people mean by that. I think that if we started a business together again, she would have to be one of the executives. It'd be the only way it would work. So if you're going to start a business with your spouse, you should do it in a way where they're an executive alongside you. One of my very close friends in the Henry Crown Fellowship with me is Elaine Shard, and Elaine was the co-founder of Wildfire, which got bought by Google. Very successful. And his wife, Victoria, they actually started together, and she was CEO, and he was the head of product, but kind of like the COO. And it was their second business that they did it like that. I could see that working really well, but that ship sailed. Like, there's zero chance that Deborah wants to live the manic life of an entrepreneur at this point. That's not happening. We sometimes joke about that, but yeah, it's not happening.
So let's get to Data.World.
It may happen after the kids move out, but that's the only chance.
Just remember, don't talk about it all the time.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we're a lot smarter now. We won't work until 11 o'clock every night and everything else. But it is. There's no way you can start a business and it not become an obsession for you. I don't think.
It's good note.
Not if you really. If you really care about it. I mean, if you're there are a lot of people I know in entrepreneurship that don't deeply love their business. As strange as that may sound, that's not what I'm like as an entrepreneur. I've got to deeply believe in it, or I can't do it. But I know people that are entrepreneurs solely for financial engineering and do quite well, and they're quite wealthy, but they don't love their business. And you can tell because they talk in derogatory ways about their employees and about their customers, and it's really it's just not me at all.
Well, let's talk about your latest obsession, Data.World. What is it?
Yeah, so Data.World, we launched on July 11th, and the ambition is to become the world's social network for data. And kind of breaking that down is that there's already over 18 million open data sets out there. They exist on many university sites, in the bowels of many corporations, on government sites. They're all over the place, and they're very poorly documented. There's very little understanding on how to use the data. There's nothing social about it. They're largely stored in silos where if you want to start to work with that data, you can't see what preceded it. You can't see how people have already worked with it, the type of queries they've run on it, how they've joined it with other data sets. None of that exists. So there's this vast knowledge that's being wasted, and an incalculable number of hours that are wasted by humanity working in silos around data problems. And this was called out by Vice President Biden and the cancer moonshot, and we're working with them on that, where his son passed away from brain cancer. My mom passed away from lung cancer. And it was just like, this is crazy that we operate this way in this age of big data. And we also operate in this age in a very networked world. And strangely enough, network effects haven't yet been brought to bear on data. With very few exceptions, they've been brought to bear in very narrow ways with advertising, online advertising. But it hasn't been brought to bear on cancer data. It hasn't been brought to bear on climate change data. It hasn't been brought to bear on poverty data. And there's huge foundations that fund these programs to create these open data sets in the hopes that it'll solve problems in the world. The National Science Foundation, NSF, when they fund a grant for you, you're required to share your data for a period of 7 years. But there is no platform, ultimately, for you to effectively share your data. So as I visited different universities, and my co-founders and others in the company have, they say, well, I don't know what that means. Do I just put it on an FTP server, or that means if someone emails me, I'll email them, or do I send it in a USB stick? And that's not the point. The point was that the NSF made that requirement because they wanted that to serve as a foundation for future research, that all of your work would be shared so that derivative work could be built on top of it. And so we've basically invented that platform, and it's going really, really well. We, from a fundraising perspective, we raised $14 million in 2 weeks, which was extraordinary and great. We got amazing investors on board. There's a lot of angel investors that you guys would recognize, like John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods, and Clayton Christopher, who's the founder of Deep Eddy Vodka and Sweet Leaf Tea, and a bunch of others. But there's also a lot of VCs you'd recognize, like Mike Maples Jr. from Floodgate, and Josh Koppelman, the founder of First Round Capital. Our lead VC is Shasta Ventures, which is very interesting because the guy that joined my board, you asked me, I'll just tie it all back, was actually one of my first clients at Coremetrics. He was the head of operations at Walmart.com. And his name is Jason Pressman. And he was such a great client. And I got to see him start out with Walmart.com when it was a small site. It was actually originally incubated by Walmart and Excel partners. And then eventually Walmart bought it back, bought out Excel. But Jason scaled all the way up to over 1,000 people as their head of operations. And I got to hear what everybody said about him inside the company. And then he became a very successful VC. And he's especially interesting because he's been on the board of Nextdoor and Shmuel since the beginning. Shmuel is one of the largest social networks for music. And Nextdoor, of course, is the largest social network for neighborhoods. So he has very relevant experience. We built an incredible team. It's the best people we've ever worked with in our careers. And it's 26 people now. It's mostly engineering. So we eventually will scale beyond that. But it's a very different business from Bazaar Voice. It's much more of a platform type of business, like a GitHub or a Dropbox or Slack, versus a verticalized kind of B2B software as a service business. So therein lies the complexity. Building a platform business is harder than building a Bazaar Voice. But at the end of the day, you can have an even bigger impact. And I'm not taking away anything from Bazaar Voice, because the amazing stat about Bazaar Voice today is that there are now over 700 million people who use Bazaar Voice every month. They just don't know it's Bazaar Voice. They read customer reviews on thousands of different sites, and Bazaar Voice is like the Intel inside powering all that. But Data.World, we do this right. When a scientist publishes their paper, they're going to say, all my data is available at Data.World / whatever their name is. Consumer Reports comes out with a new report. All the data is available at Data.World / Consumer Reports.
That's the ideal scenario.
That's ideal scenario, is that there's almost this Wikipedia aspect of it, that it becomes the world's resource for not just the data itself, but all the context around it. How are people using it? How are they joining it up with other data sets? What are the breakthroughs they're creating with it? What are the queries that are being run? Who are these people? How do I connect with them? All this context that's missing around data that exists around code. If you're on GitHub, anybody in here that's on GitHub knows that GitHub has a tremendous amount of context around code. And I would argue that GitHub has actually moved the bell curve to the right for all programmers. It's made everybody better because it's provided the Library of Alexandria of code with all the context that goes along with that. There's 14 million people now on GitHub. So we obviously have a long, long way to go to get to be that type of size, but we're off to a very strong start.
Okay, I'll leave the rest of the questions to the audience for that. But we'll wrap up our part with a quick lightning round. Got 5 questions for you. What startup is on your watch list that you're not related to or a part of?
So, I of course want to name some that I've already invested in.
Not allowed.
So the one that I really want to invest in right now, I'm trying to beg my way into it, is Conversable.
What do they do?
Andrew Busey's startup. Basically, it's commercializing this whole chatbot revolution. That if you eventually believe that because we're all using these things, you'll use these to order from sites. In terms of texting, you'll use these to get customer support in terms of texting, stuff like that, versus even going to a website, then you want to invest in the chatbot revolution. And for Andrew, it's a really interesting business because he started iChat way back in the day in the 90s. And this is kind of a revisit in a much different age where we're all networked via these amazing supercomputers. And this is the newest one, the iPhone 7. Thing that blows me away is this thing has 256 gigabytes of memory on this phone, which is as much as my laptop. So that's kind of an extraordinary time in history. And the way I'm trying to convince him is I'm like, Andrew, this space I can really help you in. I can open doors with retailers, with brands that work with retailers, et cetera. But I'm not yet there, but hopefully he'll let me in.
Conversable is the name?
Conversable.
Conversable.
Yeah, based here in Austin. He's a serial entrepreneur. His co-founder is also a serial entrepreneur. Very, very interesting company. Right now based out of Capital Factory.
Okay, one work-related book recommendation and one non-work-related book recommendation.
So I love reading, so I'm reading all the time. One that I just read recently is called Ready Player One, which I'm probably already seeing a number of people shaking their head. It's by this guy Ernie Klein. He's actually based here in Austin. Steven Spielberg is directing a movie based on it that'll come out in 2018. It is a very, very good read for someone like me because it's like a romp through technology past with a great sci-fi bent on. It's dystopian, which I'm not a big dystopian believer, but it's really fun. It's fun reading, and it's very witty, and yeah, you'll laugh out loud with that book.
That one's not work related.
That's not work related. Work related. That's a good question. I mean, there's kind of the classics. I read so many business books. When I started Core Metrics, again, I was 26 years old, and even though I just graduated from my MBA, nothing really prepares you for starting a business. Experience is the best teacher. And so I read like 250 books in the next year and a half to try to get any wisdom I could get from the ages. And then I sang about a book as it encapsulates wisdom in a very efficient way. It's like sitting down with a great mentor. Probably the most recent one I read that made an impact and that I really agree with is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, the co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz. But the most classic book, although parts of it have been debunked, but that will change the way you think, I think forever, is The Innovators Dilemma. And that still is. It was the only book, by the way, that both Steve Jobs and Andy Grove, who both said most business books were just crap, it was the only one that they both recommended. It's an amazing, amazing book, and it'll get you in this framework, this frame of mind, when you're thinking like, oh, I can't do that because some big company will just crush me. It'll make you realize that, no, actually you can. When I told Deloitte & Touche Consulting Group that I'm not coming back and that I'm starting Core Metrics, the partner there, who still to this day will not talk with me, said, he said, IBM, they're just going to crush you. Oracle, they're going to crush you. Like that's not going to succeed. You'd be totally crushed. And I was like, well, I beg to disagree. IBM later on bought the company for around $300 million. But we were rated the #1 solution by Forrester Research for the industry and achieved great things with that company. It went through lots of trials and tribulations. But he couldn't even think that way because he himself was stuck in the innovator's dilemma. He couldn't even recognize that these big companies wouldn't immediately copy us.
You gave us three.
That book explains
The Innovators Dilemma. Mm-hmm. What were the other two?
Ready Player One.
Ready Player One.
Yeah, and then The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Horowitz, yeah.
Who do you look up to and why?
It's a good question. I mean, I look up to so many different people. I look up to anyone that is truly living their passion. So one of my biggest examples growing up in life was my father. Unfortunately, both my parents had passed. But he lived life 100% on his own terms. Like he found what he was passionate about, and he did that all the time. And for him, very different than me, that was fishing. But he invented the first halogen fishing light, sold those all over the world. By the way, I did not get any money from my parents. When I got married, I had $1,000. My wife had $2,000, and we were on our own. So we've made everything on our own. But just want to make that clear in this election year. But my parents became. It's such a ridiculous year.
Let's not go down there.
Yes. Yeah, don't get me started. But yeah, my dad fell in love with that and created all these different fishing products. So he found a way to blend what he was truly passionate about with business. And how cool is that? And so I think I've done the same thing. Now the funny thing about that story is that my dad when I was 10 years old, he turned down Walmart. We keep coming back to Walmart. I don't know why. But he turned down Walmart, who wanted to sell his products in all of their stores. And I was so angry at him because, I mean, yes, I grew up kind of anti-commercial, but I didn't realize it. But inside, I was always like really ambitious. I realized that later on in life. And I was like, Dad, how could you do this? Like, your product, they want to sell it in all their stores. Like, why would you turn them down? I don't understand. And he sat me down at a small table and he looked me straight in the eyes and he said, son, you may realize the value of keeping life simple one day, or you may not. That's your choice. There's amazing wisdom in that. And later on in life, when he saw me become so entangled with so many things, he said he would joke with me, and he would say, "Son, you never did get that lesson, did you?" and I'd say to him, "Dad, you know what my problem is?" And he would start laughing. I'd start laughing. He would say, "Yep, you're too damn ambitious." And so, anyways, I really looked up to him, and I look up to anybody that I very much look up to John Mackey. I mean, he is an incredible. He is a mentor. He is someone I call a mentor. And if you look at the shit that John Mackey has taken over the years, most recently there were these PETA people. John Mackey has been a vegan for 16 years. I'm also vegan, and there was these PETA people like surrounding him when he was giving a talk, who basically are demanding the immediate release of all farm animals throughout the world, and so their frame of mind is just like, all farm animals must be immediately released. Anything else amounts to slavery, and it's a very, very extreme position. That man has done more to raise the consciousness about being a vegetarian or vegan than anybody in the world. But those people don't realize that you have to move people's consciousness along, you have to meet people where they are, and then slowly move them along. You can't radically jolt someone there. It just doesn't work that way. No matter what the issue is, it's kind of amazing that our country like so quickly embraced the gay marriage issue. I mean, that was like a really cool time in the history of our country where we just very quickly evolved, Now, the people that had been fighting that issue would tell you it's been a long, long time. But it certainly seemed that it happened much faster than I would have predicted in a great way. So, I really, really respect people like that. And the thing that's kept John going is because he's truly passionate about his business. And he's created one of the most valuable companies in the world with one of the best cultures in the world. And that's very much to be admired.
What was the best advice you received in your life?
I've received so much good advice. That's a very, very tough question. I mean, one of the best pieces of marriage advice, I've been married 20 years as of June, so I feel a little bit qualified to say that.
You're qualified.
Is that when you start having children, and I notice there's a child here, when you start having children, I love my kids, you need to take at least 1 to 2 vacations every year with just your spouse. And I actually got this advice reading a book about how to have a great marriage. I can't remember what the book is called, I'm sorry. But that was one piece of advice in the book. And another piece of advice in the book is go ahead and live your life today as a couple the way that you dream about living it in the future. So we went on all types of crazy trips when we got married, and we didn't spend that much money. We went to Greece for our honeymoon. We spent $40 a night, for real, on our hotel. We bought the Frommer's under 40 guide, and I'm telling you, we had just as much fun on that vacation than we do now on some big fancy vacation. It doesn't matter. The thing that matters the most is the time you're spending together and the time that you're growing together. And so when you have kids, there's a there's a tendency to say, now everything needs to be about the kids. All of our vacations need to be about the kids. Everything needs to be in service to the kids. And kids don't think that way. They really don't. What they care about most is if you guys stay in love. And if you guys continue to grow together, and if you guys serve as a great example. Remember the Abraham Lincoln quote. That's what they care about. They don't care about if you guys go on every vacation with them. As a matter of fact, when Deborah and I were in Israel, our first time in Israel, we're Jewish and about to go into fasting for Yom Kippur. But when we went to Israel, we had to come home 2 days early because Hamas started to fire rockets in. And it was amazing. Like, it was an amazing experience. I mean, it was amazing to be there for our first time and that to happen. Now, fortunately, we were mostly through our vacation. That's a very selfish comment, but we had seen a lot of amazing things, and we're a little bit ready to go back. We love our kids and love being in Austin. And so I called Rachel up, and I said, "Hey, Rachel, we're coming back 2 days early. I can't wait to see you." Crickets on the other end of the line. And the person watching our kids, when we came back, she said, "Oh man, I felt so bad for you guys in that moment." And I said, "You know what? That was a beautiful moment, because you are 22 years old, and you're in all the stuff you were taking them to do. Like, I have a lot of energy, but I don't have as much energy as you do at 22. And they were having such a blast and we were having such a blast in Israel. Like, that's what it's all about." And so, it wasn't like I got home and Rachel was depressed or anything. Like, she was very happy to see us. But that's a win. That's a win. Like, you don't want highly dependent kids, and you don't want to highly smother your kids, and you want to continue to grow together, because you will grow. Your personality is set, but you're going to grow. You're going to evolve. You're going to change over time. You're going to want to do different things, scratch different itches, maybe have a different career, and you're going to need to have that support, and you're going to need to have grown together. So there's a lot of students in the room, so you're going to have to file that one away for when you do have kids, but that's an important piece of advice.
Last one. Best kept secret about Austin.
The best kept secret about Austin, I'm trying to bust this out, but all my secrets are about entrepreneurship. So the best kept secret about Austin is that there's a tremendous amount of focus on, that we live in this post-Austin Ventures world, and I even referenced that before. And the cool thing is that there's a lot of diversity now in terms of entrepreneurship. You have CAVU, which is Clayton Christopher's fund, which is focused on CPGs. You have a CPG incubator called SKU. You have another guy in town, Andrew Mitchell, I think his VC fund, it's called Brand Foundry, if I'm not mistaken, which is focused on CPG. You have two large healthcare VCs. You have Kevin Lalonde and the Sante Ventures team. You have Evan Melrose and the Spindletop Capital team. You have a bunch of PE shops. We have one of the largest PE firms in the world with Vista here, who's been buying a lot of software as a service companies. They're based here. So if you really look under the hood, there's a lot more than just pure tech. And of course, that's going to accelerate even more with the medical school that's launching here. You're going to have VC funds that spring up around that. And of course, Kevin's firm and Evan's firm, Spindletop and Sante Ventures are going to get, I'm sure are going to get involved there. So there's kind of this amazing amount of diversity. You just recently too had the first female-focused VC fund launch in Austin, which is really neat. And there's one called the Diversity Fund as well, which launched recently, which is focused on LGBT entrepreneurs. So you've got a lot going on here, and a lot to be excited about in terms of the foundation for Austin's future. And of course, you have more incubators than we've ever had, and Capital Factory, of course, is the biggest. And huge kudos to Josh Baer, who also teaches here at UT and does the Longhorn Startup class with Bob Metcalf and others. So you have a lot of really good ingredients here for success. There's a lot to figure out too, because we're growing very quickly and we've got growth problems. But I'm very much a capitalist. I'm very much a conscious capitalist, and there's a lot to be excited about.
Brett, thank you so much for coming. Audience, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.